Greetings and welcome to another lecture in Introductory Psychology. This one involves the type theories of personality. Now, type theories, well, if type looks a little like the word stereotype, you're on the right track. Because type theories suggest that because of a person's membership in a certain category, whether it's a psychological category or a physiological category, whether it's because a person, for instance, is from this part of the country or whether a person has this physical trait, that since they're that type, they're going to have a certain personality. For instance, you may say, well, the stereotype for blondes, for instance, is that blondes aren't particularly bright, they're kind of ditzy, that sort of thing. They're very social, they're very concerned with how they look, and we know that not all blondes are like that, but that's the stereotype. And a type theory might say something like that. If you're like this, then you're like this. If you have red hair, then you have a really fiery temper, you lose your temper all the time, sort of thing. Is that actually true? Not necessarily. But type theories work under those assumptions, so you can probably see the problems right now. I do want to talk about one particular type theory simply because even though we're not using it in terms of sort of these exact definitions in this exact way, it's definitely still influencing the way we look at people. It's called the Somatoform Theory. It was devised by someone with the last name is Sheldon. Now, somatoform, well, soma means body, and so the whole point of the somatoform theory is that your body type, your body shape, determines your personality. Now, Sheldon somehow figured out, after observing hundreds of people, and no, I don't know exactly how, he did write a book on the topic, which was one of the more boring books I ever tried to read. I gave up relatively quickly. But Sheldon said that he had figured out a way to sort of put people into different categories according to their body type. And because their body type of that body type, they would then have certain personality. Now, this is the same problem that we're having with the trait theory, in that he didn't explain why people with this body type have this personality. It's a correlation kind of thing. But he claimed to find a huge correlation between these body types and these personality types. Specifically, he had three broad categories of body types. The first he called Endo Morphs. Now, for endomorph, you should think fat. These are people who are overweight, who are chubby, who are plump, who are zoftig, or my personal favorite, people who are fluffy. Okay? And the idea is that people who are fat, chunky, whatever, big-boned, that they have a certain personality. Now, what's kind of interesting here is, think of the stereotype, if you're from the U.S. anyway, think of the stereotypes of fat people. What are fat people supposedly like? You know what? Sheldon found that too. Sheldon said that fat people were very sociable. They like to be around others. They're very affectionate. They're self-indulgent. Of course, if they weren't self-indulgent, they wouldn't be fat. They're always seeking approval. They're always very cheerful. You know, the happy, joking fat person. The second category is the exact opposite in terms of body shape. They're ectomorphs, and ectomorphs are very, very, very skinny. Now, again, I'm not sure where Sheldon drew the line between skinny and sort of normal, but he came up with this idea of skinny, and it definitely has some overtones of what I would call geeky or nerdy. So think of the stereotype when you see movies, and there's sort of this really, really, really skinny person in it, particularly a skinny male person, but also to some extent female. What are they going to be like? Sheldon found that skinny people tended to be smart, they tended to be creative, they tended to be solitary. Which is kind of the stereotype in a lot of movies of, you know, the really smart person who's not good socially and is kind of shy, and they're often, if not usually also, skinny. Okay? Lastly, we have the Mesomorphs. Now, Mesomorphs are people who have muscles. The way I remember these, by the way, is M for mesomorph, M for muscle. When you say ectomorph, ectomorph has kind of those sharp consonants in it, ecto. And so skinny people, you know, have like sharp bones. Their elbows stick out, the knees and everything, ribs stick you, that sort of thing. Endo, on the other hand, sounds kind of rounded, endo. And fat people, of course, are kind of rounded. And anyway, that's how I remember it. Mesomorph, M for mesomorph, M for muscle. These are people who are really, really buff. And what Sheldon apparently found was that people who are very buff are also very energetic, they're very aggressive, they're competitive, they're daring, they're brave. Sheldon did not come up with these stereotypes. They have been around for a very long time. But Sheldon believed that he had found a way to prove that the stereotypes are true. Unfortunately, although many, if not most, stereotypes do have a kernel of truth to them, we all know we probably know more exceptions to these rules than we know people who follow the rules. And it also doesn't explain, for instance, why people who suddenly, do people who go from skinny to very muscly all of a sudden change their personality entirely? Or people who go from muscly to fat change their personality? It's difficult. And is it the body type that gives us the personality, or is it the personality that gives us the body type? We're back to chicken and egg. And Sheldon never bothered to answer those questions, and no one else could find the things that he claimed to find. So this is pretty much a debunked theory. Although I do want to point out a couple of interesting permutations of it. The first is that I have had students who are taking classes in physical therapy come up to me and say that they actually use these terms in physical therapy. Now, they don't use them in terms of describing a person's personality. They use them purely in describing someone's body type. But it still is rather interesting that the terms are still around. I do think that Sheldon came up with the terms. It's just that they have been adapted for another use, and for my mind, a better use. They can be used very well to describe a body type without trying to attach a personality type to it as well. The other thing I want to point out is those stereotypes I was telling you are still very much alive and well. It's very interesting, for instance, to look at the cast of movies and TV shows, and to some extent, even more extreme, to look at the cast of cartoons. Because you tend to find this sort of mesomorph hero, ectomorph, evil scientist or geeky friend, endomorph, jolly sidekick who doesn't get the girl or guy. You tend to see a lot of this. And it is interesting that you can look at a cast. There was a TV series, it was called Lost. And it started in around 2004, I think. And had a very large cast, but I could have told you immediately when I looked at the pictures of the cast that the big fat guy was not going to be the hero. Because big fat guys and big fat ladies are only heroes in comedies. Because it's funny that a big fat guy or a big fat lady can be a hero. Right? Now the muscly people can occasionally be a villain, and sometimes be comedy relief, but more often people who are in shape or people of what we call average build, they're going to be the good guys. How often in a drama, for instance, do you see a big fat person, be a romantic lead? You don't, because big fat people are not romantic leads. They're only in comedies, because then you can laugh at them. Skinny people, like I said, tend to be mad scientists. How often do you get a skinny person who is going to be the hero? Although they're also the villain sometimes. I give you in the Disney movie Aladdin, I give you Jafar, skinny guy who's the villain. It is really very interesting to look at how we categorize people by body types, because in reality, it doesn't work well at all. In reality, you can't pull someone overweight out and have them match this more often than not. So, even though I've described this to you and talked about it, please don't go diagnosing people's personalities according to their body type. Unless, of course, you're talking about TV shows, movies, and cartoons.